My parents confessed that my sister's boyfriend was actually our cousin when he proposed in front of everyone. I don't even know where to begin, or if I'm the asshole here. I feel like my whole life has been a lie, and I might be the one who just burned it all to the ground. I just need an outside perspective because I think I'm losing my mind. It all started 3 weeks ago on what was supposed to be the happiest night of my sister Rebecca's life. We were at this gorgeous rooftop bar in Valencia, the kind of place with fairy lights strung between olive trees and a view that stretched all the way to the sea. The air was warm and smelled like jasmine and salt. A guy was playing a soft flamenco guitar in the corner, and the whole place was buzzing with this perfect golden energy. My sister was practically glowing. She had this laugh that could make anyone smile, and that night, it was constant. She was sitting across from her boyfriend Diego, her hand resting on his, looking at him like he was the only person in the world. My parents, Luis and Paloma, were in their element, playing the role of the proud, perfect parents to a T. My mother was circulating, all graceful smiles and compliments, making sure everyone's glass was full. My father was holding court with Diego's friends, telling some polished anecdote that made them all laugh on cue. This was our family's brand: polished, respectable, united. We were the family everyone else envied. On the surface, anyway. Underneath, my parents were masters of secrets. Anything unpleasant, anything that might tarnish the family name, was just swept away. It didn't exist. The biggest non-existent thing in our lives was my dad's brother, Uncle Javier. The story we were told was simple and clean. He was a bit of a black sheep, wanted a different life, and moved away to South America years ago. End of story. We never got Christmas cards. We never saw a picture. If we asked questions, my mother's face would tighten, and she'd say, "That's ancient history," in a tone that slammed the door shut on the conversation. So, we stopped asking. He was just a ghost, a myth we all silently agreed not to talk about. That night, though, there were no ghosts. It was all about the future. I saw Diego take a deep breath, his knuckles white as he squeezed Rebecca's hand. He caught my eye from across the table and gave me a shaky, terrified smile. This was it. The air crackled with anticipation. He stood up and tapped his wine glass with a spoon. The chatter died down, the guitar player softened his melody, and suddenly every single person on that rooftop was looking at them. Diego's voice was a little hoarse when he started talking about how Rebecca was his whole world, how he couldn't imagine a single day without her. It was so heartfelt, so perfect. Rebecca's eyes were shimmering with tears, her hands fluttering up to her mouth in a perfect picture of joyful surprise. It felt like a scene from a movie, the beautiful culmination of a love story we had all watched and celebrated. This was the moment our family had been waiting for, the next perfect chapter in our perfect lives. Looking back now, it's so obvious. The cracks were always there. We just got so used to walking around them that we forgot they existed. That whole perfect family image was built on a foundation of silence and deflection, especially when it came to Uncle Javier. I remember one time, I must have been about 12, I was, digging through an old shoebox of photos in my dad's study, looking for baby pictures of myself. I found this faded Polaroid tucked at the very bottom. It was of 2 young men, probably in their early 20s, arms slung around each other, grinning under the Spanish sun. They looked so much alike, and one was clearly my dad. I ran out to the kitchen so excited and asked my mom, "Mama, who's this with Papa?" The change was instant. It was like a shutter came down over her face. The warm smile she'd had a second before vanished. She snatched the photo from my hand, her fingers pressing into the edges so hard they left dents. "Where did you find this?" she asked, and her voice wasn't her own. It was flat, cold, and dangerous. I mumbled something about the box in the study, and she just said, "You don't go through your father's things. That is private." She never answered the question. She just turned her back to me, slid the photo into her apron pocket, and started chopping onions with a terrifying intensity. The message was crystal clear. "This door is locked. Do not knock again." It wasn't just him, though. Our whole family history was full of these little locked doors. NGL, it was a whole culture of denial. We had a great aunt who suddenly stopped coming to Christmas, And when we asked why, my parents just said she'd moved up north for the quiet life. We found out years later from a cousin that she'd had a massive falling out with my grandfather and been disowned. When my dad lost his job for a few months when I was in high school, they told us he was on a sabbatical to write a book. They created this entire narrative, complete with him spending hours in his study with the door closed, just to avoid the shame of admitting he'd been laid off. It was suffocating. We were living in a reality they curated for us, and we were expected to just play our parts without asking questions. So when Diego came along, their reaction should have been a massive red flag. Instead of their usual guardedness, they were instantly, almost aggressively, welcoming. It was bizarre. My dad, who usually sized up Rebecca's boyfriends like they were trying to steal state secrets, was suddenly Diego's biggest fan. He was taking him to exclusive golf clubs and introducing him to business partners as practically my son already. My mom was even worse. She learned all his favorite recipes, fussed over him constantly, and basically treated him like royalty. At the time, I just, thought they were relieved that Rebecca had finally found a good man, stable, handsome, on his way to becoming a doctor. He was the perfect final piece for their perfect family portrait. But now I see it for what it was. It wasn't genuine affection. It was a desperate, frantic effort to bolt this new, shiny future into place. They were trying so hard to build a beautiful new story that they hoped it would be strong enough to barricade the door against the ugly old one that was trying to break through. Their over-the-top love for Diego wasn't for him. It was a shield for themselves. So there he was, down on one knee. The whole world just seemed to shrink down to the two of them, caught in a perfect spotlight under the Valencian stars. Diego pulled out a small dark velvet box. He opened it, and the light from the fairy lights hit the diamond inside, and it just exploded. It sent little rainbows dancing across Rebecca's face. My sister let out this tiny, choked gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears were already welling up in her eyes, the happy kind that make you feel like your heart is going to burst. I felt it too, this huge swell of pride and joy for her. This was her moment. Diego's voice was thick with emotion. "Rebecca," he started, his eyes locked on hers, "from the moment I met you—" He never got to finish the sentence. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blur of motion. It was my mother. But she wasn't moving like a proud mom about to welcome a new son into the family. She lunged. It's the only word for it. She moved so fast she knocked a chair over, the sound of it scraping against the tile cutting through the hushed silence. Her face was a mask of pure, primal panic. Her eyes were wide, not with joy, but with a kind of animal terror I had never seen before. She grabbed Diego's shoulder, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. "Stop," she hissed. The word was a poison dart in the perfect bubble of the moment. It was quiet, but it carried. Everyone close by heard it. The guitarist's gentle melody faltered, and then died completely. The silence that followed wasn't reverent anymore. It was heavy, suffocating. Diego looked up at her, his face a mess of confusion. "Paloma? What's wrong?" My mother's eyes darted around frantically like a trapped animal looking for an escape. She was shaking her head, whispering hoarsely now, for everyone to hear. "You can't. Just stop." She looked from Diego's bewildered face to Rebecca's, and her voice cracked as she said the words that shattered everything. "Stop! He's family!" The words just hung there in the air, nonsensical and ugly. My dad was on his feet now, trying to grab her arm, saying, "Paloma, not here, not now." But it was too late. The bomb had been dropped. A collective, confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Diego's friends were looking at each other, totally lost. "Family? What does she mean, family?" I heard one of them whisper. Diego finally found his voice. "What are you talking about? My family is from Asturias. We've never even met your father," my mother choked out, the words tumbling out of her in a frantic, unstoppable rush. "Your father, his name is Javier, isn't it?" Diego just stared at her, nodding slowly, completely baffled. And then she said it. Javier is your father's brother. He's your uncle. Time just stopped. The air went out of my lungs. Uncle Javier. The ghost. The myth. And suddenly, he was real. And he was standing right in the middle of our lives, holding a grenade. I saw the realization dawn on my father's face, not of surprise, but of pure, unadulterated horror that this was finally happening. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at my sister. The joy had evaporated from Rebecca's face, replaced by this awful, blank confusion. Her hands dropped from her mouth. She looked from Diego, still on one knee holding the ring, to my mother, who was now sobbing hysterically into my father's chest. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were trying to piece together the impossible. Diego, was her cousin. I saw the exact moment the logic clicked into place. Her whole body went rigid. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like she'd been dusted with flour. Her eyes rolled back into her head and she just collapsed. There was no graceful swoon. She went down like a stone, a dead weight, hitting the terracotta floor with a sickening thud. The little velvet box flew from Diego's hand, and the perfect ring skittered across the tiles, coming to a stop under a stranger's table. The perfect moment had become a public, humiliating nightmare. And all I could do was stand there, frozen, as my sister lay unconscious on the floor of a rooftop bar, a casualty of a war I never even knew we were fighting. For a second, nobody moved. The only sound was my mother's ragged sobbing and the distant, oblivious hum of Valencia. Then chaos erupted. People were shouting, someone was calling for a doctor, and waiters were rushing over. But I was stuck. The world had tilted sideways and my ears were filled with this high-pitched ringing sound. Everything felt wrong, like a badly dubbed movie. The fairy lights that had seemed so magical a minute ago now felt harsh and interrogating, exposing every ugly detail of our family's collapse. I looked at Rebecca, lying so still on the dirty floor, and I didn't feel sadness. Not at first. I felt this white-hot volcanic rage building in my gut. It was a physical sensation, a heat that crawled up my throat and made my hands curl into fists. We weren't just a family with a secret. We were a lie. A walking, talking, smiling lie. And I had been a part of it. I had celebrated their relationship, toasted their future, and told my sister how perfect they were together. I felt dirty. I felt complicit in my own sister's deception, and the shame of it burned hotter than the anger. While Diego was kneeling beside Rebecca, his face pale with shock and, whispering her name, my father went into full damage control mode. His first instinct wasn't to check on his daughter, it was to manage the audience. He put on his calm, authoritative voice, the one he used to handle business crises, and started waving his hands dismissively at the concerned onlookers. "It's all right, everyone. She's just overwhelmed. A little too much excitement." Then he turned to Diego's horrified parents who were pushing through the crowd and said, in a low, urgent voice, I could barely hear, "It's distant. Second cousins, practically strangers. It's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things." Not a big deal? I thought my head was going to explode. My sister was unconscious on the floor because she'd just found out her fiancé was her first cousin, and my father was trying to spin it like a minor genealogical inconvenience. Then I saw it. His eyes darted to the floor and landed on the engagement ring, glinting under a chair. And he did something so monstrous, so unbelievably disconnected from reality, that I will never, ever forget it. He walked over, smoothly bent down, and picked up the ring. He wiped a smudge off the diamond with his thumb, and then he walked back to Rebecca. He took her limp, unconscious hand and tried to slide the ring onto her finger, as if he could physically force the nightmare back into the pretty box it came from. As if putting the ring on her would somehow erase what my mother had said and reset the whole night. Something inside me snapped. It was a clean, sharp break with the person I had been my whole life, the good daughter who never made waves. Before I even knew what I was doing, my arm shot out and I slapped his hand away from my sister's. The sound was like a gunshot in the sudden quiet, a sharp, stinging crack that made everyone freeze, The ring flew out of his grasp and clattered across the tiles for a second time. My father stared at me, his mouth hanging open in utter shock. In his eyes, I saw not just surprise, but outrage. How dare I defy him? How dare I ruin his attempt to literally paper over the catastrophe? But I didn't care. I stood between him and my sister's body, a human shield. I wasn't protecting her from fainting anymore. I was protecting her from him. From them. From the lifetime of secrets and lies that had led us to this exact moment. This was the point of no return. The war had just been declared, not by my mother's panicked confession, but by the sound of my hand hitting my father's. Their shame wasn't my burden to carry anymore. This was about my sister's truth, and I was going to burn their whole perfect, polished world down to the ground to get to it. The ride home from the bar was a silent horror film. Rebecca was wedged between me and my mom in the back of the taxi, semi-conscious and shivering, her head on my shoulder. My mother was just a statue of grief, staring out the window with silent tears tracking through her perfect makeup. My father sat in the front seat, his shoulders rigid, barking directions at the driver. The air was so thick with unspoken things it felt hard to breathe. The moment we got inside our apartment, the performance was over. There was no more concern for Rebecca, only for the breach in their defenses. While I was getting my sister a glass of water and settling her on the sofa, my father cornered me in the kitchen. "Give me your phone," he said. It wasn't a request. His voice was low and menacing. "What? Why?" "We are going to handle this as a family, quietly. There will be no more public scenes. No calls, no texts. We will contain this." My hand instinctively tightened around my phone in my pocket. Contain it? Like it was a chemical spill? My sister was in the other room, her life in ashes, and his first thought was PR. The rage from the bar came roaring back. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to lock this down and pretend it'll go away. Look at her." That's when my mother drifted in, her face blotchy and swollen. "Please, mija," she whispered, her voice watery and pathetic. "Don't make this worse. We were only ever trying to protect you." Protect us? The word was so absurd I almost laughed. Before they could stop me, I slipped past them and locked myself in my bedroom. I could hear my father pounding on the door, his voice rising. "You open this door right now. Do not disrespect me in my own house." I ignored him. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in over a decade. Tia Marisa, Javier's ex-wife, the one they'd cut out of the family after he moved away. She was the only person who would tell me the truth. She answered on the third ring. "Hello?" Her voice was wary. "Tia Marisa? It's me," I choked out. Something has happened. It's about Rebecca and Diego." I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a messy, frantic torrent. The proposal, my mother's confession, Rebecca collapsing. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "I knew this day would come," she finally said, and her voice was filled with a sorrow so old it made my bones ache. "I have everything. Photos, his birth certificate, letters. I'll send them to you. They can't deny it if you have proof." But then, an hour later, after my father had given up yelling and the house had fallen into a tense, simmering silence, my phone buzzed again. It was Marissa. Her voice was different this time. Colder. Harder. "There's something else you need to know," she said. "This wasn't just them keeping a secret. They made a choice." She told me that 10 years ago, when Diego was accepted into a pre-med program in Madrid, his mother, a woman I'd never even known existed, had reached out to my parents. She had begged them. She told them her son would be in the same city as their daughters, and that the children deserved to know they had a cousin nearby. She wanted them to have a connection to their father's family, and my parents said no. According to Marisa, my mother was the one who made the call back. She told Diego's mother that introducing the children would be unnecessarily complicated. that it would raise painful questions from the past that were better left buried. And then she said the words that stopped my heart. She told this woman that revealing the truth would hurt Rebecca's chances, that Rebecca was a beautiful girl from a good family, and that having a publicly acknowledged connection to a black sheep uncle and his illegitimate son would tarnish her prospects for making a good match. They didn't just hide the truth to avoid their own shame. They actively, deliberately chose to keep their children in the dark, to deny them a cousin, to deny Rebecca the truth of her own bloodline, all so she would remain a more marketable bride. They didn't protect her. They curated her. They treated her future, her happiness, and her heart as a strategic asset in their lifelong campaign to maintain appearances. My sister's love story wasn't a casualty of an old secret. It was a time bomb they had knowingly planted at the center of her life, just hoping it would never go off. After I hung up with Marisa, I just sat there on my bedroom floor in the dark, my back pressed against the door my father had been pounding on. The house was dead silent now, but the silence was loud. It was the kind of quiet that's full of held breath and unspoken threats. The hot, explosive rage I'd felt at the bar was gone. It hadn't disappeared, though. It had cooled, hardened, and sharpened into something else entirely. It was a cold, heavy clarity that settled deep in my bones. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not really. It was about liberation. That phone call reframed my entire life. Every memory, every holiday, every family photo was suddenly tainted. My parents hadn't just been hiding a shameful secret to protect their own pride. They had actively sabotaged our lives to curate a perfect image. We weren't their daughters. We were their props. We were accessories in the grand performance of the perfect, respectable family, and our own happiness was secondary to the script they had written. I started thinking about all of it. My dad's beaming face at my university graduation. Was he proud of my achievement? Or was he proud of the photo opportunity, the chance to tell his friends his daughter had a prestigious degree? Rebecca's piano recitals, where my mother would sit in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Was she moved by the music, or by the image of her cultured daughter performing for an applauding audience? All those years, I thought their obsession with appearances was just a harmless, old-fashioned quirk. Now I see it for what it was, a disease, a poison that had infected everything. Was any of our happiness ever real, or was it just a carefully constructed illusion we were all forced to live inside? The doubt that crept in wasn't about whether I was doing the right thing anymore. Marissa's revelation had burned that question to ash. The new terrifying question was, can our family even survive the truth? What will be left after I burn the lies away? I pictured my parents' faces, twisted with fury and betrayal, pointing at me and screaming that I was the one who destroyed everything. And maybe, in a way, they'd be right. They built the house of cards, but I would be the one to pull out the bottom card and watch it all come crashing down. I would be the one who broke my own family for good. The thought made my stomach clench with a cold, sickening dread. But what was the alternative? To shove the truth back under the rug? To become just like them? To watch my sister try to piece her heart back together on top of a foundation of lies? No, I couldn't. Lying there on the floor, I could hear Rebecca softly crying in the living room. It was a broken sound, the sound of a heart being ripped in two. And I realized the core of it all. The immense pain she was feeling right now wasn't caused by the truth. It was caused by the lie. The truth is just a fact. Diego is her cousin. The pain came from the fact that my parents had let her fall in love. They had watched her build a future, dream of a wedding, and plan a life with a man they knew she could never have. They let the lie fester for years, growing and wrapping itself around her heart until it was impossible to remove, without tearing her apart. Secrets don't protect love, they poison it from the inside out. The longer you wait, the more deadly the venom becomes. And my parents had let it poison her for a decade, all for the sake of appearances. My purpose was clear now. The cure was the truth, no matter how much it burned on the way down. I gave my parents an ultimatum. We would all meet at my abuela's house in 2 days. The whole family, my aunts, my uncles, our closest cousins. Diego and his mother would be there too. My father called me a dramatic, hysterical child. My mother just wept and said I was destroying our family over a misunderstanding. But they knew they had no choice. My abuela's house is our family's hallowed ground, the one place where truth has always held more weight than appearances. They couldn't refuse to show up. The day of the meeting, the air in my abuela's living room was thick enough to choke on. Everyone was sitting on the antique, velvet-covered furniture, stiff and all silent, avoiding eye contact. My parents sat together on a love seat, looking small and cornered. Rebecca was beside me on the sofa, a fragile statue, her eyes red and empty. Diego and his mother sat across from us, their faces a mixture of grief and guarded curiosity. I stood in the middle of the room by the heavy oak coffee table, my heart hammering against my ribs. The cold resolve I'd felt had been replaced by a sickening tremor in my hands. I didn't make a speech. I didn't yell. I just opened the manila envelope Marisa had overnighted me. I laid the documents out on the polished surface of the table, one by one, like a prosecutor presenting evidence in a trial. First, the old photograph of my father and his brother, Javier, young and smiling. Then Javier's birth certificate, followed by Diego's, the father's name clear as day on both. I placed the baptismal record for Diego next to it, showing my own grandfather listed as a witness. Then came the final damning piece of paper, a copy of a child support order, signed in my grandfather's spidery blue ink, a quiet acknowledgement of his son's responsibility. Lastly, I unlocked my phone and placed it on the table, showing the thread of messages from Marisa, detailing my mother's calculated refusal to let the cousins meet 10 years ago. The silence in that room was a living thing. It was heavy and suffocating. I watched my tia Sophia's hand fly to her mouth, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. My Tio Carlos just stared at my father, his face like stone. My parents didn't even look at the papers. They just stared at me, their eyes filled with a venomous, bottomless betrayal. They had been exposed. Their perfect world had been brought to ruin, not in a private whisper, but in a public execution in front of the very people whose opinions they valued most. When I finished, I turned to Diego. "I am so sorry," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "You were brought into a lie that was not your fault. None of this is your fault." He just nodded, his eyes glistening. Then, Rebecca moved. Slowly, like an old woman, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the engagement ring. She held it in her palm for a moment before placing it gently on the table next to the documents. The soft, final click of the diamond on the wood echoed in the silent room. It was the sound of a future dying. She looked at Diego, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I can't," she whispered. That was all she said. She stood up and walked out of the room, and I followed her. The fallout was immediate. Diego told my parents he and his mother would be submitting to a DNA test for legal confirmation and that he wanted nothing more to do with them, ever. But the most surprising thing was the rest of the family. The anger in that room, palpable and immense, wasn't directed at me. It wasn't even directed at Rebecca for breaking the engagement. It was all for my parents. My tia Sophia was the first to speak. "How could you?" she asked my mother, her voice trembling with rage. "How could you watch them fall in love? How could you let it get this far?" One by one, they turned on them, not for the original secret, but for the suffocating silence, for the cruelty of their inaction. So now, here we are. My family is shattered. Rebecca is living with me. She's a ghost in my apartment, barely eating, barely speaking. She just sits by the window, staring out at a world that no longer makes sense. My parents are completely isolated. The family has frozen them out, and they blame me. I get texts from my mother about how I used a private matter to humiliate them, and voicemails from my father calling me a traitor. In their eyes, I didn't liberate my sister. I took a sledgehammer to the foundations of our family for the whole world to see. I chose a messy, public truth over a quiet, manageable lie. So, Reddit, AITA for publicly exposing my parents' decades-long secret at a family meeting, effectively blowing up my sister's engagement and fracturing our entire family, instead of keeping it private as they demanded.